Welcome back to the Art of Basil. I am Basil, of course, and this is the first episode of Ordinary People. That's right, ordinary people that do extraordinary things. I talked about it in the past, and now it's today that I'm bringing it to you. Applause. I don't hear anybody, it's just me here. First up, Dr. Marvin Dunn, a retired university professor, historian, author, and activist who runs a non-profit organization to preserve Black history right here in Florida. So let's jump right into it.
Marvin Dunn. I'm 82 years old. I was born in Central Florida, a little town called DeLand. My family moved to Miami when I was 11. So between DeLand and Miami, I grew up in Florida. Well, we first moved to Overtown, and then we moved to an area called Opelika, Bunche Park, which was a housing development for Black veterans. My dad had been in the Navy and qualified to buy a house in this segregated, federally sponsored housing project called Bunche Park. My mom was a housewife. My dad picked fruit. Um, I'm old enough to have had to go to the back door of white people's homes. I've lived long enough to have had to sit in the back of the bus. I've lived long enough to be the smart kid that they sent over to the white school to get their old textbooks to bring over to the colored school because the white kids got new books. I lived through Jim Crow. There are very few of us left, comparatively speaking, who can say that Jim Crow was a lived experience. It was for me. I remember the first time I realized that being Black was a problem. I was 7 years old. I was at the post office with my mother. And in those days, Black people couldn't open bank accounts in DeLand, so they kept them in the post office. So we go to the post office. I was about 7, in line with my mother, and these white people kept getting in front of my mother, skipping the line. I must have been in second grade because I, by that time, knew what a line meant. And I asked my mom when we got outside, why were those people getting in front of us? And she said, because we're colored. Because we're colored. When we get on the bus, my mom would grab my hand, hold it tight as we would pass the white people to get to the back of the bus, and she would relax and we'd sit and she'd be all right. So I lived that experience. I lived Jim Crow. Once we got to Miami, I think my leadership in schools started to show a little bit. I was a good student. I got admitted to college out of the 11th grade, so I went to Morehouse at age 17. But my time growing up in Miami was nearing the end of Overtown's heyday, of the inner city's heyday, when Miami was a place where a lot of Black people came to celebrate. That was sort of ending when I left to go to college in 1957. 1957, September, my mom and dad and my grandmother take me down to the Greyhound bus station, downtown Miami. They have one of those scenic cruisers, double deckers. And my mom and my grandmother took me to the back seat, and they gave me a little brown bag lunch and said, now, honey, my mom is sanctified. So, honey, now you stay on this seat now till you get to Atlanta. This was a Sunday night. Tomorrow when you get to Atlanta, you stay on this back seat. And I said that I would. My dad, who was a longshoreman, was not sanctified. My dad gets on. My dad used the N-word a lot. He raised 5 boys, so he was inclined to use the N-word from time to time when he wanted to be serious. So he says to me, little N-word, you stay your ass on this seat until this bus get to Atlanta tomorrow. Don't you move. You got that little N-word? Say, I got it, Pop. That bus got to Fort Lauderdale, and I moved to the middle of the bus. I don't know, this was a Sunday night. I don't know why I felt better sitting in the middle of the bus than it did on that back seat. That next morning, Monday morning, that bus was passing through Waycross, Georgia. And some white kids were using the Greyhound bus to get to school. And these kids got on the bus and they're talking, chattering, and a little white girl sat down next to me. I'd never been that close to a white person. And as soon as that child sat down next to me, you could hear a pin drop on that bus. And then finally, from the back, and there's some black folks in the back seat saying, "Come on back here, honey, come on back." And people started saying, "Nigga, get up. Get up. You must not know. Get up. Get back there where you belong." And a white Marine in uniform stood up and said to these people, "Why are you bothering him? He's not bothering anybody." They forgot about me at that point and turned on him. "You must be a Jew. You must be from up north. You don't know how we do things down here." So the bus driver, now we're outside of Waycross, pulls that bus over at a service station. He walks back to where I'm sitting, and he says to me, "You were creating disturbance on this bus. I'm putting you off." And that man gave me my little cardboard suitcase and put me off and said, "You wait for the next bus to Atlanta, which should come out in about 3 hours," which I did. And got on that next bus. You want to guess where I sat? Took my behind the back seat that my mom and dad had told me. But that was my trip to Morehouse, 1957 in the fall, going to college. I went to a conference in Gainesville some years ago, maybe in 1997 or so. And Rosewood, Florida is about 40 miles due west of Gainesville. And this is a town that in 1923 was burned to the ground, an all-black town by a white mob because of a lie that a white woman told. And I never heard of Rosewood, really, just little pieces of data here and there. So that Sunday afternoon, the conference was over. I got in my car and I drove west on Highway 24, very rural, until I saw the sign that said Rosewood. And it took a left, and it ended in a cul-de-sac. This is a very rural area. And I got out of my car, and I'm looking around, and I see an opening in the woods. It was like a green tunnel, and that was the old railroad track. The railroad, the train that they brought in used that railroad track to evacuate some of the folks who got saved. So I was walking along that railroad track, trespassing, mind you, on people's property, just walking up that, and I spotted a graveyard and tombstones. And I wandered over and I see the names of a couple of people I knew were Rosewood pioneers, and realized that I found the Rosewood Negro Cemetery. And by this time, it starts to cloud up, and it starts to wane a little bit. And I'm walking back down this railroad track, and I realize I'm out here by myself. If I disappeared, no one would know I was out here. So I walk a little fast to get to my car, and then I head back to Miami. But that graveyard stayed with me. That the story stuck with me. So I started going back and forth. But I would say the thing that turned me towards Black history was discovering Rosewood and discovering how much of that story needed to be told, and wanted to be one of the persons that helped to tell it. One of the places that I take the Teach the Truth tour to is Live Oak, Florida, where in 1944, a 15-year-old black boy named Willie James Howard was lynched by 3 white men for writing a letter to a white girl, a love letter to a white girl. Um, these men went to this boy's house. He was working at a 5 and dime store with a white girl, and he fell in love with her and wrote this letter. And her daddy got the letter. And the girl's father takes 2 other men, and go to the house where this boy lives. And he's heard that these men were after him. So he runs from the dime store where he was working to his mama, and he's on the porch at his mama's knees, and his mother's asking, "What happened? How?" And the car drives up, these 2 men, 3 men, and the girl's father takes a pistol and forces the boy to leave his mother. She's running behind the car, and they go to a lumber yard where the boy's father worked, made him get in the car, and then they drive them out to the Swanee River. And on the way to the river, Mr. Goff, the girl's father, ties Willie James's hands and feet. They get to the Swanee River. They make the boy and his dad get out. Mr. Goff puts his pistol to Willie James's head and says, "Jump or take what's in this barrel." So Willie James gives his dad his little Bible, and his dad says to him, "Son, I'm glad you went to church." And then this man watches his son get lynched. The boy jumps into the river, drowns. The same day, the black undertaker is sent out by the sheriff to get the body and bury it in an unmarked grave, which remained the case for decades. These men got away with this, but I take my students to this place because I want them to identify with this boy and understand the kind of vulnerability that black people had at that time. But not to be angry or hostile, because the folks who did that are long dead. But that doesn't mean we don't tell the stories. We don't blame people today for what happened then, but we still have to keep the stories alive. When Rosewood happened in 1923 and the town was burned down, one building, one home remained. And that home belonged to a white man named J.W. Wright. He ran a general store, and Mr. Wright hid people, black people, in his house during the massacre, women and children, no boys over 13. And he and his wife, this was very cold when this happened, January, fed these people at night, and then had to go back outside in the daytime because the mob might spot them. So Mr. Wright and his wife were heroes of Rosewood. They were ostracized. After this was all over, they really died in some disgrace in Cedar Key. But the house is still standing, and there are now new owners of the property who want to tear it down. And this house sits on 35 acres of property in Rosewood, very rural, as I said. I co-own 5 acres of land that abuts this property. So what I'm trying to do is raise the $2 million needed to buy this house and the 35 acres that it contains and save it for history, to get the property and turn it over to the Department of Interior for Rosewood to have a national park. So that's my goal, is to use our nonprofit to raise the money to have a national park in Rosewood that has the J.W. Wright house standing on it. People can help us by going to our website, which is the Miami Center for Racial Justice.org, and see the things that we're doing and contribute if they wish to support us. We're living in a very dangerous moment in Florida, where the very presence and history of black people is being challenged. We have a governor who wants badly to be president, and as a part of his quest to gain the White House, he is sacrificing black history as a way of attracting the right wing of the Republican Party. One of the things that the governor has said is that we can't talk about certain things in Florida schools, in Florida universities. We can't talk about institutional racism. Really? Listen, I was teaching at FIU, Florida International University, before DeSantis was born. I was on an aircraft carrier, on the bridge of an aircraft carrier as a naval officer, protecting my country before Ron DeSantis was born. Now he's going to sidle up to me and tell me what I can say or can't say in a classroom, especially about being black. So I am outraged, frankly. It's difficult to get me in that state of mind. But we have now such pressure on us to not talk about things that make some white people uncomfortable, that black history in Florida is at risk of being destroyed and totally wiped out. May I give you an example of one of the things that bothers me about this? DeSantis says, the governor says, the state of Florida requires the teaching of black history. He's right. The state of Florida requires schools to teach black history. Florida has 67 counties. Only 11 of them actually do it. So there's no enforcement. We wave that flag and we require it. It doesn't mean anything if you don't enforce the law. He says, we can talk about slavery, but not really. We can't talk about anything that might make a white person feel uncomfortable. So I wrote the governor. I said, okay, a whole list of things asking, can we talk about these things? Never got a response. But I just don't know. I don't know how to teach a course about black history, about slavery, about a woman having her baby taken from her breast and sold away without eliciting people's feelings. So it's an attempt to de-emotionalize history. And if you do that, you no longer have history. You have a catalog, but no real history.
I hope you enjoyed this talk with Dr. Marvin Dunn. Join me next week when I will be talking with Shanae Barrow and one of her dogs, Magnus. Yep, Magnus is going to be on the show. Unbelievable canine with so many talents and awards. I think it's the first time I interviewed a dog. Nothing but joy here on that one and warm feelings. Join me next week for that. See ya!